Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guest from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Good to be with you again.
Pleased to
Hope
have
all
you,
is well
Robert.
in Australia.
How's
If
the
not
how's the
well
weather
in your
in
part of the
Canada?
world. We've had very hot weather,
Hmm.
maybe not by your standards, but we had about 3 weeks. Some system must have been just stationary over us, I think.
Hmm.
And it was very humid as well, but it's cooling off a bit now. So we're actually, the days are getting quite a bit shorter, and you have a feel of um, fall in the air.
Okay, righto.
A
Because
little bit of
yeah,
freshness.
yeah, yeah. Well, our
The
weather,
nicest season as far as I'm concerned. I love the fall.
yeah, yeah, it is beautiful. I must admit the changing of colour of the leaves and the if you like the rains that come. Regenerate after the dry summer. We've had a good winter. We went for a drive yesterday, and across the 40 kilometres to and from each way to where we went, the dams were full. The grass was green and growing. Today is 26. It'll have a maximum 26. Tomorrow, maximum 29, 30, and then back to about 13 or 14 the day after with some more rain. So it's quite variable. It's certainly spring is in the air. You can see it with the bud burst. We've already had the almonds flower. Now the cherries are flowering and the plums. So the bees are starting to move. They're out and about. Although it's early in the season, my resident bee expert has told me that the season will be average or down a bit. He's just watching the flow, and he watches it. He's 80, I think he's 80 something. He's been around bees his whole life, been a farmer his whole life, and so he watches the critters, he watches the creatures, and he can read the weather early on. Just the pattern of lay up, that where the bees are laying the brood, the young. Is it a good lay up? Is it not? Well, that's how he reads it. So it's interesting, this affinity with the natural world that he has, and it really is beautiful because if anything, we have to consider that our view of things may be slanted, it may be twisted. Man has got the ability to actually be confused, to be muddled, to be disorientated by the influence of other people. And if anything, what brings us back, what finds our equilibrium, is to look at the natural world. Um, that's why you call it orientation. When you take someone into the bush, into the scrub for a week or so, orientation, and that's what it is. They reorientate themselves by being in the natural environment. Beautiful way to consider, to putting your thoughts straight. Anyway, let's go through the newspapers and let's have a look and see if we can get our thoughts straight on what's actually transpiring. So firstly, the Australian, we're looking at, okay, a lot of noise about COVID as usual, but also there's an interesting phenomena going on, and that is the collapse of the American campaign, or the American-led campaign in Afghanistan. And there's pictures of the Taliban there, and I find that fascinating, these pictures, because they're depicting the Taliban as essentially just a mob. Just a mob. They don't have the elite electronics, they don't have the massive weaponry, they don't have Kevlar protection. They're just a mob. And this mob has managed to persevere and hold on to their nation. And that to me says quite a lot. That the American military has been defeated by a mob. So that's to me is quite profound. And I think that's not the case at all. I think there's a bigger picture involved, and we need to actually have a look at that bigger picture. Okay, around Australia yesterday, 31st of August, we had silent protests outside government buildings, whether in this case it was council chambers, local government, but in our case we had a state MP and also the local government offices in the shopping centre near us. And so there were silent protests where the people turned their back on the government or the council chambers or the state chambers. They turned their back on them. In other words, we are disgusted in what you're doing. You have no clear mandate to do what you're doing. You've got to change it. You've got to review it. You've got to get Parliament open again and start doing your blinking job, which you're not doing. This is fascinating. This article in Epoch Times, very, very important article. It shows that in Australia, in the last month, 5 weeks, 420,000 jobs. 420,000 jobs were lost. 20,000 jobs a day. In New South Wales, 200,000 small business workers, 12,000 large business workers. These are the numbers. These are real numbers through the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Okay, so validated. Now, I think it's most important that we recognise that this policy of lockdown is all about asset stripping. What is it? You say lockdowns have the same effect as aggressive form of asset stripping. This is what it's about. It's about the big players, big end of town, stripping the assets of the little players. Don't think it's not, and you think, hang on, this is a catastrophic situation, once in a lifetime. No, it's not. This is propaganda. The end result is asset stripping from the middle class, from small business. That's the objective of what they're doing to us. So Epoch Times, interesting that they're coming up with these sorts of views. I find them inconsistent, but at times they really surface with a brilliant article, and that to me is very important for us to look at. Now this one here, Gateway Pundit, non-government organisations capture the Human Rights Commission. And you say the Human Rights Commission, that's tied in with the United Nations. How can you say non-government organisations capture it? Anyway, I went to the article and I had a look. Excuse me for a sec, I got a cough. Okay, I'm back. I went to the article, I had a look, and it made reference to this website, European Centre for Law and Justice, and in particular the financing of the UN experts in the special procedures of the Human Rights Council. Now, I downloaded the PDF and I've saved it to my desktop, and you could just as easily, there is the PDF, I'll cut across to it now. So that's the PDF, the actual document on my desktop. Very important to recognise that United Nations is a captured species. What do you say? No, it's not. That's a national nations coming together. It's an international body, autonomous, self-serving. It's got a parliament, and they discuss things and all that sort of stuff. And I say to you, no, it's not. Last week we spoke about the World Economic Forum under the, now what is it? The foundational control of Klaus Schwab. He's director of that organisation for life, and he has the capacity within the constitution of that foundation to appoint his own successor. And it just so happens that his son happens to be the managing director of the World Economic Forum. And then you say, well, what about the World Health Organization? Surely that's an expression of the United Nations. And I say again, no, it's not. It's an expression of individuals, quite a few foundations, such as Bill Gates, such as Anthony Fauci. These people hold inordinate sway over that non-government organisation. It is a non-government organisation. That's what it is. It's not tied in, as you would think, with the United Nations as such, as there's the parliament, they're going to debate things, they're going to pass laws and do that. No, it's not. These are actually tied in with foundations, with a public-private partnership. Public-private partnership. Now, Jeremy Lee, in his What is the New World Order video in 1991, 30 years ago, he spent 3 days in the UN offices in Sydney collecting data on the New World Order and these public-private partnerships. And that's what we're seeing. This is not a clear demarcation line of if this is a public service that's being done. Vested interests control these organisations. And that's why we flow through from the World Health Organization to the Therapeutic Goods, TGA is it? Therapeutic Goods Association in Australia. And of course, government policy comes from that. Government policy is coming from who? Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci. Government policy is coming from who? Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci. Pfizer, the vaccine people, all these sorts of things. They have a vested interest. And so if government policy is coming from them, then there is a vested interest, a clear line of vested interest between the implementation of policy and those that stand to make billions. Those that stand to make billions out of it, there it is, the direct link. And of course, if you looked at the article by Dr. Joseph McCullough in regard to the Vanguard, in regard to BlackRock, in regard to, I think it's called State Street, those three mega fund holding organisations control, not only do they control the big pharma, but they also control big media. And that directly links into media such as Fox News, CNN, NBC, ABC, whatever you want to call it. All these huge corporations, the fund handlers for all these corporations are managed through these same conglomerations of Vanguard, of BlackRock, of State Street. All right, so it's all tied in together, and I think it's very, very important when you consider, and this is really what I'm laying on the table today. I want you to consider the assets being stripped from the middle class, the assets being stripped from you through your job losses. These things are deliberate policy for the benefit of the big end of town. They are and I'm the really big end of town, not just the bloke who's got $1 million house, the really big end of town. This is for their direct benefit. They are stripping assets so that the jobs that you used to have go into their huge corporations. The income, the small business that you used to operate is being snaffled up, swallowed up by the big ends. This is libertarianism. This is laissez-faire capitalism. This is what it's about. And that's what we're witnessing. And to think that say like the ABC or Nine Entertainment, whatever it is, are actually socialistically aligned, they are. This is real socialism. This is real communism. And it's controlled by the big end of town. Those are my thoughts. That's my opening salvo. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, it's a well-known saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And power involves the concentration of power in institutions. So people seem to think that there's an opposition between the great corporations and the financial institutions and socialism, but they both have the same objective, which is to centralize power. So although they pretend often to be antithetical, to be enemies of each other, this has never been the case historically. And you were talking about the UN institutions. Well, the UN was set up by socialists. If you look at the secretaries general of the UN from the very beginning, they practically all come from the socialist end of politics. And they all serve this internationalization, this concentration of power at the international level. So you were talking about asset stripping, Arnie. Well, who protects us against that anymore? There used to be, anti-combine legislation in countries, and when an organization was getting so powerful that it could crush everybody else, occasionally there would be an inquiry and there would be some kind of breaking up of that organization. But that seems to be something that has completely disappeared from our society. You don't hear about it anymore. In fact, the criticism of this sort of development in society used to be that it was totalitarian or dictatorial. Do you ever hear those words in the news anymore? I don't think you do, because totalitarianism is the objective of the establishment, and they control through their control of finance primarily. They control the news media, and this is the transformation of our language that is undermining our ability to resist this constant concentration of power in society. When they're stripping assets from people, this is something that at one time would have been regarded as an evil. But now we've got a concept of competition that is a departure from the way people used to think of competition. At least a lot of people used to think of it. You know, there are two kinds of competition. There's a competition that is designed to crush others, or there is a competition that is intended to elicit excellence in others. But the notion of the concept to crush, to destroy the other party, has taken such hold in society, and the people who are acquiring these vast economic interests and organizations, and stripping the assets of the little people, they would regard them as the little people, they are completely unconcerned about the effect of this on the lives of others, because they think that this extreme version of competition that produces a winner and a loser is a normal thing. But there's no reason why competition should do that. Competition, in a healthy sense, should just be a steps up to an improvement of all systems, because you are trying to best the other fellow, yes, but not in a way to destroy him, but in a way to raise the advantages, to increase the advantages for everyone in society. So we've got a true perversion of thinking in our society now, and it's become so accepted among the I guess the oligarchs, the ruling class, or whatever, that there seems to be no end of it, and there seems to be nothing but increasing concentration of power and, as you say, asset stripping, taking away the property and the opportunities for ordinary people in society. Well, this is unsustainable. It's got to result in a society in which the purpose of life is lost for probably the vast majority of people. And there's no way a society in which the purpose of life has been lost can continue. So we're at a dangerous crossroads with this thinking that is concentrating power in this way, and reducing so many people to penury through the perverted application of the employment system, which just puts everybody under the thumb of the financial institutions, because they are able to determine what and where employment will be. So in effect, we all become their slaves.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for that, Robert. That's such an important summary, if you like, of what's actually going on. And I wanted to reinforce that by cutting across to a particular. Let's have a look. I've picked the wrong one. Try that one. I want to bring up a book. And the book is on a desk that I've got to go to and sit down and read, but it's I've been directed to the book, and it's called The Two Nations: A Financial Study of English History. The Two Nations: A Financial Study of English History. And the reason why I'm bringing that particular book up is because the stripping of assets of the poor is not unprecedented. I've got another book. It's in regard to the land, if you like, the land barons in 1880s, 1890s in Melbourne and Victoria, and how they were buying up land. They were driving the price of land through the roof. Through the roof. They were driving the price of land through the roof, and then there was a collapse. And of course, in the collapse, that's where the financial institutions move in like vultures, and they pick it all up for a song. So they've loaned the money to, at least they've loaned the credit to individuals for them to exploit, and then at the critical time, the market collapses, and those same financial institutions pick them up for a song, and of course that causes those individuals who are exposed to that sort of level of debt, that it causes them to force them either to lose all their assets or to go into bankruptcy or both. And so again, it's a compounding effect that the narrative is such that it's the financial institutions win every single time. They win on the way up and they win on the way down, and they really are vultures. And the book about Two Nations is that these, if you like, the big end of town, the monopolist, the laissez-faire, the libertarian, the big end of town is able to do just a simple maneuver at a critical time, and there it is. There it is. So really, really important to place our thinking in regard to these things, because we're experiencing it. We, you and I, are experiencing it right now. Our neighbour is experiencing it. It's very real. 400,000 Australians. How many? 400,000 Australians are losing jobs, are losing employment, are losing security. And what options do they have? It's cap in hand to the government. And of course, if the government is controlled by private foundations pursuing policy, then the day will come where you will not get the dole, you will not get unemployment unless you're vaccinated, because you've got to go and pursue a job. And you may not even be allowed in the building unless you're vaccinated. So in other words, it's straight out blackmail. They will market the product to you whether you want it or not, and it'll be conditional for a license to live. This is how exploitive, this is how ruthless this policy is. This is seriously how dangerous it is to give this much power to individuals. Now, our constitutions, our common law, our, if you like, our ancient freedoms, our ancient rights are all about limiting the king, limiting King John, limiting government. It's all about limiting. And that's what we're experiencing right now. This is where it becomes unlimited, where the government, the bureaucracy, the king becomes a tyrant. And that's what we're experiencing. There's all these wonderful excuses out there, and they've got a team of spin doctors to make sure that you get all of the, if you like, all of the narrative explained to you in detail. I was listening to a summary of the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinta Ardern, I think it is, and she will take away your ancient rights and freedoms for the most wonderful reasons in the most softly spoken voice. But behind it is a totalitarianism. Behind it is tyranny. Behind it is slavery. That's where we're heading. That's what this policy, the outworking, the effect of this policy is actually doing for us. So we really need to change our thinking. We've got to actually reorientate. We've got to consider that this is not unprecedented. It's not unprecedented. It's just part of history that's not actually been taught to us. History is not just dates and wars and a king. History is actually about themes. It's about policies being pursued. It's about power being pursued. And at times, occasionally, power is overcome. And 1215 Magna Carta was one of those times. But even in that instance, that, okay, you've got the barons and their armies, and you've got the king and his army meeting at Runnymede. And it's either we're going to have a war or you're going to put your seal on this document, Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And he put his seal on it. But he immediately protested. Do you know who to? To the Pope. He protested to Rome. And Rome agreed that they had no right to compel him to put his seal on that. And so within a month, Magna Carta was actually annulled. Who by? By the Pope. And so it had to be fought again. 1215, 1216 the seal was put on, and I think again in 1225. And again in 1295 when Magna Carta was finally written into the common law. So that was 80 years. But before 1215 to 1295, you go back to 1100, and that's the Coronation Charter. And those same ancient rights were being fought for then. So it was a 200-year fight. 200 years. So it's not a we're going to put my hand up, we're going to stand outside a building, we're going to get what we want, and it's all going to be over. That's not how it works. Not in history. In history, it is a long, steady, progressive resistance against tyranny. And eventually it opens up. And eventually those freedoms which are fought for are held on to. And we've lost it. We've lost our freedoms. We've lost it because we've been complacent, because we haven't been educated. We've actually been deprived of our education. Deliberately withheld is our cultural history. And that's gone on for at least 60 years. So that's 3 generations of school children have gone through. And that education has deprived us of our real history. It's not just dates. It's actually policy. History is crystallized policy. And that's how we have to actually go back to it. So I've had to, grey hair and all, I've had to go back and I've had to relearn. What is my cultural history? What are those things that have been fought for, and how have they been fought for, and how difficult was it to overcome the tyrant? And of course this whole thing is before us, and it's before us every day now. It would be nice if we didn't have to listen to every newspaper report in the land. It would be nice if we could just sit on our hands and go fishing. But that's not the time that we live in. We are at war, and we are at war for our ancient freedoms. And there's not a lot who are actually even aware of the war. There's a lot who are actually terrified and hiding under the table. And I noticed that yesterday when I was in a shop, and there was a lady there, and you could see she was actually intimidated by the whole situation. She had a badge saying that she could walk around freely without a mask because she's got a medical exemption. But everyone else must be in masks. That was her point of view. And I think, well, okay, that's a valid point of view. I've got a different point of view. And because I was exercising my different point of view. And we were at what was it? Not an impasse, just a difference of opinion. She chose to not wear a mask for health reasons, and I chose to do something different. Very, very important to recognise that freedom is the right to choose or refuse. Now, if you had, say, in that circumstance, if that person had been given the authority, would she have chosen to inject a vaccine into my arm if she had the authority? And that's really the question that's coming down to it, because we're having opinion polls in the newspapers. We're having opinion polls asking the question, should vaccines be mandatory? Should that person's opinion override my opinion as to whether or not I should have a vaccine? Should it? Should it be a mob rule? Should we actually be just part of the crowd where 50%, this is where it all comes down to it. We've actually got to seriously start taking a step back from the abyss, a step back from the cliff where the lemmings ran over, where the Gadarene swine ran over. We've got to take a step back from that position and start asking ourselves these questions. Should someone next door to me be able to make a choice of applying a medical procedure on my body? Should they? Should their opinion override mine because 2 people next to me decide that yes, vaccines are mandatory, and I'm the naysayer, say vaccines are not mandatory, and I have ancient rights and freedoms? This is where it comes into it. This is the rubber on the road. It's such a very, very important point for us to take a step back, to actually start contemplating these things, considering these things. Are we going to move into a medical tyranny where a person's medical status, their health status, their immune status, their viability doesn't come into it? It's really that important, because I could have adverse reactions, but it's mandatory. I could have a chronic situation, but it's mandatory. I could have a personal choice against it, but it's mandatory. This thing might kill me, yes, but it's still mandatory. Is it really a majority decision to possibly kill my neighbour because I choose that this is the option? That's where we're heading. That's where we're heading. That's why freedom of choice, informed choice, is an individual thing. And that's why freedom is vested in the individual, not in the mob. Not out of fear, but out of actually informed consent or non-consent. That's what it's about. We live this life. We're not cattle. We're not sheep. We're not in a herd, where each person is unique and individual, and they have their own rights that are vested in them, not in the mob. And what is so frustrating in this time is that these ancient freedoms, the church was at the forefront. The church was at the forefront. Archbishop Stephen Langton penned the Magna Carta. He placed it together and he witnessed it. The church was at the forefront of these ancient freedoms. And I'll also let you know that the church was at the forefront against things like slavery. The church was, where it knew, it recognized that authority is vested in the individual. This is a gift from God. And that if you like, the purpose of this life is for the individual to find their own salvation as they see fit, not imposing their salvation over someone else. It's really, really important. We've got to we've got to take a step back. We've got to start thinking. We've got to start re-educating ourselves and not listen to the mob and not listen to the propaganda machine. We've actually got to really take that breath and start thinking these things through, because that's every single one of those ancient rights is up for grabs for the mob if the mob is herded and frightened by the mainstream media, the witch doctors of today. That's my thoughts up till now. So I'll give you the floor, Robert Klinck.
Well, it's something that they're considering imposing a policy like forced vaccination, and the motivation for it is fear. The governments everywhere have these behavioral psychology experts now, and they have admitted that their uh, policy with regard to this COVID was to enhance the level of fear in the population. Well, if you're operating in a context of fear, you're probably not thinking uh, very logically or rationally. And yet, this is what all governments seem to be trying to uh, develop as the governing environment for policy these days. It used to be that your medical history was a private affair, but that idea seemed to have been thrown out the window over the past 2 years. They're, it's everybody's business whether you've been vaccinated or not. Well, and that's not their business, and they should keep their nose out of it. But they've been told that if you are not vaccinated, you are a mortal threat to the other members of society. Well, that's a perspective, but to accept that as the perspective that is going to determine the medical policy of your society is such a dramatic and dangerous step that it can't be allowed. Uh, there has to be some sort of ability of the individual to control his own health. And this has worked very well for thousands of years, but now all of a sudden the principle has been overturned, and your ability as an individual to make these decisions has been not only thrown into question, but turned into a great moral issue in which you come across, if you're standing for your rights, as practically a social criminal. It's a situation that, well, if it becomes totally predominant and accepted, then it is absolutely the end of any freedom in society. The price of freedom, it has been said, is eternal vigilance. Well, we live in a society in which narcissism has been inculcated in the population to such an extent that most people seem to be completely preoccupied with themselves, and they're not thinking of the other fellow. But this is a departure completely from the Christian principle that you love your fellow man and you want the best for him. But all these people who are pushing for the vaccines give the impression of being obsessed with their own security, their own safety. And the governments come up and say, we will make you safe. The motto is, no one is safe until everyone is safe. Well, unfortunately, if you're alive, you are not safe, because there's no absolute safety in being alive. There are, everybody is going to die at some point, for sure. Although I wonder if some of the people who are promoting these new technologies are actually thinking that they will be able to avoid the phenomenon of death. I talked to a fellow, I regarded him as very intelligent, and he said some time ago, I cannot imagine myself not being conscious because I've died. And I wonder if the people at the top of this food chain or whatever, the top of this hierarchy, are not trying to come up with a way of making themselves immortal. It sounds like a crazy concept, but it's something the mind can conceive of, and therefore it could be that behind all this mRNA technology and injections, that sort of thing, is an idea that if mankind can merge with technology, then somehow it will confer immortality on him. It's an interesting idea. Anyway, as I said, we're living in a society of narcissism. Narcissism promotes emotional analysis, emotional perspective on all things. And an emotional perspective that is being imposed on other people is simply intolerable. We've had a total corruption of our educational system. This has been done primarily through the corruption of our language. We no longer think in terms of the language that existed, say, 100 years ago. We got completely different preoccupations. The youth are being brainwashed to see everything in terms of homophobia or transphobia or racism. These are all politically correct terms, as is the very term politically correct that are derived from Marxist ideology, all developed after the Bolshevik Revolution, when there was an attempt to disseminate these terms and this perspective throughout the world. Well, our governments are now collaborating in this, and our institutions of education are directing the minds of our youth to these preoccupations. The meaning of words, the conventional meaning of words, the old meaning of words has been overthrown in many respects. So now we have a term like mandatory. Well, mandatory used to mean that you didn't have to do something, right? If it was mandatory, then you had to do it. But when governments are saying that the vaccine will not be mandatory, that would imply that you don't have to do it. But they're imposing such stringent conditions and penalties on people who are not going along with the vaccine program that the very concept of not mandatory, it no longer seemed to have meaning. The concept of a pandemic, the definition of that was rewritten just in time for I think for the swine flu, but they took away the concept that a pandemic had to involve a high level of mortality. And now a pandemic is just the spread of a virus, widespread dissemination of a virus in society. Well, we've had widespread dissemination of viruses in society forever. But if they're not killing a lot of people, if they're not doing a lot of damage, then people should be allowed to deal with them on these situations on their own. You have an immune system. Your immune system does better when it has challenges. And for some weird reason, the current thinking is that the challenges should be removed, and everybody, rather than depending on the ability of their bodies to defend themselves from disease, should depend upon some scientist in a lab to come up with a vaccine that will do the job instead. Well, personally, I trust my body more than I trust the scientist in the laboratory. I don't think that their wisdom is as great as they think it is. And their wisdom actually becomes a great threat to society because of this narcissism, which gives them an overconfidence in their own abilities and a preparedness to interfere in the lives of others in a completely inappropriate way. Sadly, we have to undo all this subversion of our language that had gone on. But it just gets worse and worse. Now little kids are taught in school about gender fluidity. When they're little kids, who in the world would introduce concepts like this into the minds of a little child? It's just mischievous. It's designed to take away the innocence of childhood and to make people permanently confused. Why in the world is anybody preoccupying themselves with a concept like this? It is just a part of a program to destroy our traditional culture, destroy our traditional institutions, primarily the institution of the nuclear family, which has served us so well, although there are lots of people these days who celebrate its destruction. And until we're prepared to recognize that this is an intentional campaign, it's inspired by an evil plan to undo our ability to think via cognitive dissonance and the subversion, the reframing of the terminology we use. So it's incumbent upon us to recognize what's going on, and it recognize that it's not a natural evolution. It is actually a program that is being directed, and it has the purpose of creating a new society. It's a society in which the individual will count for little and the group count for practically all. And if they're taking away rights from individuals and putting the rights in groups, how can a group have a right? A group can't have a right apart from the individuals within the group. So this concept of group rights in itself is a false concept, and another thing that we have to expose and to refute in order to preserve what the great benefits that the wisdom inherent in our tradition involves.
Thank you for that, Robert. I'm going to actually cut across to another website because I think there's to me, some important information that we need to actually place in perspective. COVID deaths. And this is the timeline from early last year. This is the timeline. And so we experienced some in up to May. This is from the lockdown started. Really, did it start in January, February last year? And we're already in September. And we had the Victorian deaths, which were predominantly in aged care facilities. Average age of over 80 years old. Let's put that in perspective. Average age of COVID deaths is 80 years old. And what we do find, I had an interesting comment by someone else. It was that we've lost the record of the flu deaths, but it's been replaced with COVID deaths, and the numbers are the same. Well, let's put this in perspective. It's now September. So that's the best part of 21 or 20 months. We've been in the middle of COVID. In 20 months in Australia, we've lost just on 1,000 people attributed to COVID. Now, most of these, 800 something, were in this concentrated area here, which were predominantly aged care and 80 years of age. We've gone through from October, 26th of October, we've gone through, and there it is. It's almost flatlining, and now we've got small bumps on the basis of what? 5, 4, 3, aged care, old people are dying. And that to me is something that we've got to actually, do I want to actually take these things into account? Do I want to actually listen to some of the things that are going on? What is it that actually causes such a grave state where 420,000 Australian jobs are lost? 420,000 Australian jobs are lost. And we're looking at aged care or old people dying to the tune of 2 or 3 or 4 over a period of that time. 1,000 old people have died over 20 months. That's not a lot. And yet the propaganda is so intense that we can't open our eyes from it. We're glued, we're fixated to the PCR tests. They're not making a noise about the deaths because there are no outstanding deaths on this. It's the PCR tests. It's the image, the presented image of intensive care units of people with tubes and everything hanging out their body on the mainstream media, constantly there. Look, there's a young person, they're in intensive care and they've got a respiratory problem. That happens every single day. But here it is, we're in a state of fear and trepidation. Chicken Little. That was the sky was falling. Was it Chicken Little? The sky was falling? The what would you call it? The emperor has no clothes on. These are stories. These are, if you like, children's stories to show something to us, to show us that we can be told something, and only those who are elite can see it. Only those who are special can see it. And those, honestly, all you have to do is open your eyes. Start doing your own research. I'm not saying I've got all the right answers. What I'm saying is that I spend some time looking and I spend some time asking the questions. What are the real questions in this whole situation? What are they? Are they lockdown, lockdown, lockdown? I know what the consequences are. I know the job losses. I know what they are. They're real. They're real. They're not pretend. They're massive asset stripping. I know that's real because it's there right in front of us. I know people who've lost their jobs. I know people who are threatened with unemployment if they don't get the vaccine, even though there is no law. There is no law. What they are is a company is so big that this is our policy. We have a policy that a vaccine becomes mandatory as a policy, and you can't. The the issue of the individual who loses their jobs, can they take that company to court? Can they take them to court? Can they take them to a tribunal that says the company has no right to make that call? Well, these are all grey areas now. All things are up for grabs because our ancient rights and freedoms have been undone deliberately as policy. And as I've shown you several times today, and I show you each week, this is due to vested interests. Who makes the profit from the vaccines? The same people who influence government policy. Who makes profit from the PCR tests? The same people who influence government policy. And the masks? Again. And the lockdowns and the job losses? Again. You see, it's all, this is the whole case. And that's why you get a book like The Two Nations, and that one that I just brought up before, and I am going to order my own copy, even though it costs a packet. The Two Nations. There are two nations. There's the normal people who just try and get on with their life, and then there is this high level, this other nation of ultra rich within each nation. And of course, are they national at all? I don't believe they are. I believe their whole persona, their whole relationship is one across border, across nations, international by its very nature. International, but as an elite group. Self-serving in this instance, obviously, demonstrably self-serving. And each week I name a few. This time it's George Soros. He's being exposed, and I believe the Clinton Foundation is being exposed as having inordinate influence over what we perceive as a government body. How can a private foundation have inordinate influence over a government body? But this is the case. And so this inordinate influence means that they can exercise vested influence over the bureaucrats, over our government. And they should have no right to do that. The function of government, the function of the representative, the function of the politician. There are two principal functions. The first is to represent the electorate in the parliament. Represent not big business, not the big end of town, not vested interests, to represent the electorate in parliament. And the second function of a representative is to hold the executive to account. To hold the executive to account. So the two primary functions, representing the electorate and holding the executive to account. And in this instance, neither of those functions is being exercised by our politicians. Neither of those functions is being exercised by our politicians. It's really, really important to take these into account, that your representative is not doing their job. Your representative is not doing their job. Now, when you consider that we've got in South Australia, we've got local government elections, state government election, and federal government election, all occurring next year. At the moment, it's all occurring next year. And that's very, very important, because you're going to be asked 3 times. And you've got to consider, what has my representative done since the last election? Am I going to do the same as I've always done? Am I going to vote blue, or am I going to vote red or green or brown or yellow or whatever, orange? Am I going to do the same? Or actually, am I going to start to wake up a little bit, grow up a little bit, and start considering that 420,000 Australians have lost their job in the last 5 weeks? 420,000 Australians have lost their job in the last 5 weeks. That hasn't even made the paper. How can 420,000 Australians lose their job in the last 5 weeks and the paper doesn't even report on it? What is the purpose of the paper? What is the purpose of the news media, the ABC, the SBS, Channel 9, Fox News? What is the purpose of them if they can't report that 420,000 Australians have lost their job in the last 5 weeks? What are they doing? By their silence, they are complicit. They are involved in the middle of this, up to their necks. They are involved. They are immersed in it. They are a captured species. They are doing the will of someone else. George Soros' name was mentioned, and I think that's very important because his foundation, I think it's called the Open Society Foundation, something like that, is tied in with a lot of left-wing movements. Get Up, tied in with these different political persuasions. Donations are made. So obviously if donations are made, then some sphere of influence is exercised over those organisations. Very, very important. And so you've got left-wing political movements that are dominated by an ultra-rich foundation that has inordinate influence over the Human Rights Council within the United Nations. That's the link. There it is. It's that obvious. There's the document. You've seen it. Go back over the video. Have another look. Seriously, have another look. George Soros. And that's also the, not Bill and Melinda Gates, that's World Health Organization. It's Clinton. The Clinton Foundation is tied in with that as well. So these are really, really important things to start piecing the jigsaw together. You're not an idiot. You're not a fool. You've got to go and do your own work. You've got to do your homework. It's there. If there was ever a time for research, it's right now. I found last week, I found a book, and I was looking for the book. I knew what its title was. I had a copy in my hand, but I wanted to put it up on the web. And I didn't get it from Google. I didn't get it from Bing. I didn't get it from the European Union, Quant, I think it is, search engine. I got it from an obscure search engine that was out there, and it was actually providing the information that was not sanitized, that was not censored out. It was not censored out by these big players. And I found the book, and then I was able to put it on our website. Really, really important when you consider that these things don't come easy. And that's why I always recommend people to get a copy of our website and put it on your computer and bring in your own search engine onto your computer. It's called desktop search, and there are many varieties. I use one called, I think it's Foxtrot, whereas there's Copernicus, I think, is the Windows desktop search, and it will search every single file on your computer. Build a database, and then it's readily accessible based on any particular word. Very, very important if you want to do the research, want to have a look, want to find the statistics. What are the statistics? The statistics are, we've gone from October through to July, which is 9-10 months without a fatality from COVID. 9 or 10 months with no fatalities, and you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it because we're in the middle of this again, and we've lost 90-something souls this winter. 90 souls this winter we've lost, attributed to COVID. Aged care, over 80, average. I mean, seriously, what is the threat? We lost more than all of COVID in the first 2 weeks of Gallipoli. We lost more in the first 2 weeks of Gallipoli. That was something we reluctantly went into, but we chose to, as a political, if you like, policy of our government. We lost more in the first 2 weeks of Gallipoli, and there it is. We've got a whole nation is in lockdown for the best part of 2 years because old people are passing. Old people always pass. This is life. Life is. Young people die. Young people don't even, some don't even get it out the womb safely. We lose, and this was a horrible statistic, but it's the truth. 1 in 3 conceptions, 1 in 3 conceptions ends up in abortion. 1 out of 3 is murdered in abortion, and we think nothing of it. But this is in the hundreds of thousands. In Australia, this has now got to the point of millions. We have lost millions in Australia to abortion, and we think nothing of it. And yet here it is, 1,000 over 2 years of old people have passed away, and we're hiding under the table. It's completely, totally disproportionate. Anyway, Robert Klinck calling for closing comments. Thank you.
Well, I think it's obvious that governments are not treating this alleged COVID crisis in an objective way, because when you come up with a policy to shut down society, you would, in any normal course of action, bring in the best minds in your society in large numbers, and you would do some kind of analysis that would present a balance sheet of harms and benefits for any policy you're bringing in. But this is not a consideration at all in the situation that we're facing. The only concern is to attempt to eliminate a virus by means of a program of vaccination, regardless of the other consequences of this. It's not only vaccination, it's also shutting down the economic vitality of your economy. And there is no examination, no consideration of the consequences of this. The consequences on viability, economic viability of citizens, the consequences on the psychological health of the population. I mean, I know someone who lives in China who just had a visit from somebody in Hong Kong, and he said people are jumping out of tall buildings on an industrial scale because their economic prospects have been obliterated. Well, you would think that there would be some statistical analysis of this kind of effect, but it is never provided. I don't even think they're publishing suicide statistics, up-to-date suicide statistics anymore. And if they're not keeping up on that, you have to wonder why not. It's probably because the numbers have increased to such an extent that if the population realized it, they would be concerned that people are being driven to take their own lives by this policy of shutting the economy down in order to allegedly contain the COVID virus. It's simply not objective. And why is it not objective? There is no intention by government anywhere, it seems, to provide the population with accurate information on the basis of which they can come to rational conclusions about what's going on. And this is a development that follows from the creation of a ruling class that doesn't think it has any responsibility to the population in general. And this idea is very ingrained in the establishment now. It's a well-known principle that if you want to know what is going on behind any policy, you should follow the money trail. Unfortunately, we have a system of money in our society that is a pure monopoly. People speak of making money, but ordinary people don't make money. They might earn money, which they obtain from somebody else, but the people who make the money are the financial institutions. They create it, they manufacture it. The way, as Major Douglas said, a farmer produces a sack of potatoes. To them, money is a commodity that they trade in. But this is a perversion of the wholesome concept of money. Money should be just a facilitator of the economic functions in society, to produce what we need, to distribute that production in an efficient way so that everybody gets the benefit of the production. But we don't have that. What we have is an inherent bottleneck so that our production is not automatically distributed among the population. It's a totally flawed concept and the key to our misfortune, because the fact that the abundance of our production system is not being got over to the population means that that population is always under stress, always under the possibility of going without, of doing without, of not having the material means to survive. And for some weird reason, after all these years of development of human ethics, we don't seem to have even the concept that people have a right to life in the context of a productive system that provides abundance. It's an extraordinary thing. And you would think it would be so patent, so clear, so evident that people should have that right, that it would be affirmed and it would be instilled in our institutions. But it is not, and it is not because of this financial monopoly, which the people who create the money regard the population as their slaves and regard their bureaucracy as their puppets. And this is the great defect in the financial system that we have. It's a monopoly system that has distorted everything in society. And until this monopoly is broken, and the way to do this is to give every person a share in the benefits of that financial system, it would be normally an unconditional share in the abundance of the productive system. If you're going to apply a condition on the distribution, then obviously you have to have some kind of elite prescribing what those conditions are. Well, who in society has any right to prescribe that for another person? They don't. And this is why we need a drastic reform of the very concept of the rights of the individual in the operation of the financial system that we have. We've got a financial system that is so maladapted to our modern superproduction society that it's an embarrassment even to think that we haven't done something about it. Here we are in the 21st century with the most amazing technology, that has been accumulated now through centuries, and yet people's lives are no more secure than they have been in the past. Where in the world are all the benefits of this technology going? They're being siphoned off by the mismanagement of our financial system. And you can see this even in the COVID business, because why in the world have the COVID policies been developed? They were all developed in order to enhance financial income to certain institutions. And therefore, you have to be suspicious if you're following the money of the rationale, the reason for the intense COVID propaganda that we've been subjected to for the past year and a half. Because some people are making a ton of money out of this. And how they're doing it should be the subject of close scrutiny. They don't publish proper statistics on the victims of COVID, to the extent that there is such a thing as COVID that is different from traditional flu. You know, as Arnie said, the people who died of COVID, alleged to have died of COVID, have all been, well, not all, but primarily elderly people. We know that many of them have already been sick, so they don't give statistics about the groups that are susceptible to COVID. Why not? Because they're not giving us information that will enable us to make proper evaluations of what's going on. You know, they should be doing evaluations on the basis of age, sex, comorbidities, obesity. It's recently come out that obese people are much more liable to have serious consequences from contracting COVID than other people. Well, this is significant. And if you're not obese and you have a very small chance of having damage from getting COVID, surely you have a right to know this. But they don't do this. They've used COVID as a device with which to target the entire population. So they've manipulated statistics, they've manipulated the reporting, they've manipulated the media to give distorted information about what's going on. And therefore, you have to conclude that there is something very suspect in this whole business. And then when you realize that the end goal of it seems to be to restructure all of society in something that's been labeled a great reset, then what is going on tends to clarify in your mind, and you realize that what is happening is in effect, a conspiracy against the population of the world. They want to reframe us, take us away from our traditional rights, our traditional concepts of what is normal, and to put us into a new hive society in which the individual will hardly have any purpose in living, or whatever his purpose will be so trivial that it will give him no satisfaction from his life.
Well thought through. Thank you for that, Robert. I don't know that I really want to add to that, because to me the summary is the key to it, and that is that ultimately this is a manipulation of our weights and measures. We call it our financial system, and it's manipulated. It is not a just system. It is not set in stone as such, but the scales are tipped to the advantage of the administrators of that system. And that to me is the key to it. It's a fraudulent system. It has been from the start. David Graeber wrote that book, that mammoth book, 5,000 Years of Debt, and that illustrates it. And of course, Michael Hudson, forgive us our debts, or forgive them their debts. It's all to do with manipulation. Because if you, even the history of the church, if you like, the ancient church was one of the year of Jubilee. Every 7 years, debts were forgiven. And then, of course, you had the year of Jubilee, which was a multiple of 7. 7 sevens are 49. So 49 and 50 were both years of debt forgiveness. And these things are vitally important if we're to consider how do we work our way out of a dilemma that's been going on for thousands of years. In this age of automation, in this age of abundance. And that's why the genius of Douglas' social credit is so important. It's at the forefront because he saw this age of abundance, this age of automation, this age of industry, of, if you like, security. And it's all in front of us, but we won't walk through the door to actually achieve it. And that's the key. We have to steel our hearts. We have to harden our hearts towards this. We have to firm ourselves up. I did have a look at statistics for suicides. You are 6 times more likely to die from suicide than you are to die from COVID. Those are the statistics, Australian Bureau of Statistics. So that to me says a lot. It says an enormous amount, that it is nowhere near the threat. And of course, with the massive injections of mRNA altering your biology, altering your immune system, changing the point where you may form blood clots and die from the injection more likely than the actual COVID. These things are very, very important. Very, very important, because the waters will become more and more cloudy as we move further and further into this dark ages, where media is complicit with the money masters, and they won't speak the truth that 420,000 Australians lost their job in the last 5 weeks, and it hasn't achieved the papers. It hasn't achieved the news services. It's not being openly discussed on Fox News or Nine News or the ABC. These are catastrophic incidents, situations, catastrophic, and they don't achieve a mention. Who are these people that would stifle the truth? Because the truth will set you free. Thank you so much for today, Robert. I really appreciate your input, your thoughtful comments and considerations.
Thank you, Arnie.
No worries. Arnie
Always good to
Luks,
talk.
Arnie Luks and Robert Klinck at the Crossroads. Cheers then.